I think back on that night now, I think, gosh, imagine if we'd said, okay, let's not publish because actually it's just too difficult. And that was the night that Jules told me to be brave. You know what, we've done it, we've got the evidence, we've got the data, therefore we publish. We publish, of course it felt uncomfortable, of course there was some follow-up, but that was the turning point, and that was the point at which we started to make a difference.
So what do you think has been like the catalyst behind these equity movements in the RSC?
When I had been here a couple of years, the chief executive at the time, Thatti, he saw me as, and I thought, okay, well, you know, you've got a degree in PhD in chemistry. What else might you be able to offer to the RSC? So he invited me to do the RSC's very first kind of annual review. There was something really quite powerful in that report, and that was ad hoc feedback, or the anecdotal feedback that was given, the testimonies that were shared, and that kind of shone a light on something that felt very uncomfortable for chemistry, and particularly around the culture and the way that individuals felt, either in the workplace or in the way that they were treated through their career. And it was clear from that we needed to do something, because once you know something, it's very difficult not to know. You only have to look at the lack of progression of females in academia and their higher professorial levels to see that there was just not balance. Talking about the consequence of publishing, it was going to be very uncomfortable for the community, very uncomfortable to share the insights, the feedback.
I'm very brave.
Steminism, the Equity in STEM podcast, sponsored by the Royal Society of Chemistry, where we hold conversations about race representation in STEM with the greatest minds in industry and academia.
Hello and welcome to Steminism, the Equity in STEM podcast, where we hold conversations about race representation in the realm of science,
technology,
engineering,
and mathematics.
My name is Allyship.
And I'm Clive Sowan.
And this is the Steminism podcast, sponsored by
the Royal Society of Chemistry. And today we are here in London, Burlington House, at the home of our sponsors.
Check it out.
So it is wonderful to be here today. A bit of a full circle moment, but we'll come back to that later on in the episode. Today we have a distinguished guest. Her journey starts with a bachelor's degree in chemistry, swiftly followed up by a PhD from the University of Exeter. She then went on to work she's been working at the RSC for over 30 years in various roles, from membership, marketing, comms, project management, you name it, most likely she could have done it. She's also a chartered scientist, chartered chemist, and a fellow of the Royal Society of Chemistry. She has commissioned numerous groundbreaking reports addressing gender inequality, racial inequality, as well as sustainability. She was the chair of the Science Council, is the chair of trustees at the Anglo Learning, and this year she was appointed as a member of the British Empire by His Majesty King Charles for her services to science. Today brings me great joy to be joined by Dr. Helen.
Amazing.
And the crowd goes,
I'll put some backdrop there. How you doing, Helen? You well?
I'm good, thank you. And thank you so much for asking me to do this. I feel quite honoured. I feel very privileged, actually.
That's the privilege is all ours.
That's right. I think especially when we conceptualise the idea of this podcast, being able to fund it was key for us. And so being able to shoot the last episode here with the leader of the organisation is very special to us and means a lot to us, and also what we're trying to do here as well. So shall we get straight into it?
Fantastic, yes.
So we're going to rewind a bit. We're going to go back to little childhood, where you were in secondary school, back to your background, and we want to find out a bit about the sights, the sounds, the smells, what it was like to grow up in your household back.
Oh, gosh, okay, so can I take you a little bit further back? I need to say that my dad was in the Navy, so I moved schools a lot when I was young, right from an early age. When I went to school, I think I went to 3 or 4 primary schools, so by the time I got to secondary school, I kind of wanted to stay put. So fortunately, I was at my secondary school for the full kind of 6 years, including sixth form at the time. But my early childhood absolutely was about moving house. It was about moving locations. It was about meeting new people. And that sense of always kind of going somewhere else was quite kind of evident. And certainly being part of a kind of naval family had a big impact on me. My dad was a marine engineer, so I had an early kind of exposure to part of kind of science, although he was definitely on the kind of engineering side. And I think that kind of inspired me when I was very little. But I think growing up, it was just about enjoying school. I love school. I don't think there was a day when I came home I didn't say to my parents, "Oh, that went really well. I really liked it." But mostly it was because I liked people. I loved being with friends. I actually was quite inspired by teaching and the people I kind of learned from. So that was my early days. I don't know about the sights and smells and stuff. Gosh, no, I went to just before I went to my secondary school, and I lived in a place called Allyship, which is near Little Chalfont when I went to secondary school, and I had to walk to my primary school down Old Allyship High Street, and there used to be a pie factory there, and so my only memories were of this pie factory, and it was really quite horrific for me. If there was ever a thing that was going to encourage me to be more of a vegetarian, so walking past a pie factory in the morning. So maybe that's my great memory of the smell of my childhood.
I like that. Yeah, interesting. My dad was also at sea. He was crew in the merchant navy, so very similar experience. Exactly, moving around, not seeing your father actually a lot because they're at sea for long stints. It's very interesting. How do you think? Do you think that maybe opened you up to working with different cultures and different kinds of people? Because I guess. Maybe your dad was having that experience and more likely to pass on that kind of...
Gosh, that's a good thought, actually. I hadn't thought about it in that way, but yeah, definitely exposed to lots of different cultures from an early age, mainly through the experience of my dad rather than my own personal experience, but because you're quite right, he went away for months, and when he was away at sea, which could be anything from 1 month up to 6 months on one occasion, but he'd send myself and my brother, he'd send us letters from wherever he was travelling to. And that was literally all over the world. So he'd send letters and he'd illustrate the letters with pictures of what was happening in different parts of the world. And of course, that was my kind of early exposure to, just different cultures and different traditions, and also what he brought back from his travels. So we had some quite interesting, I think when you're in the Navy, you can bring things back on ships that you couldn't bring on an aeroplane. Yeah. And, plants would turn up in huge big baked bean cans, like plants and things like that. Or, it would be something he'd bought off the local markets, or it'd be a necklace made out of some form of bean or something. But I'm pretty sure you wouldn't have to bring some of that into the country. Yeah. Too many lots of regulations around imports. But yeah, so I think maybe, and I haven't, so thank you for saying asking that question. I never thought about it like that, but I think you might be right.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting what we take from our parents without even knowing sometimes. And I guess that takes us to the next question. I think you touched on maybe your introduction to science, but leading the Royal Society of Chemistry, what made you pick chemistry?
Yeah. Do you know, chemistry, I think I was always destined to do something with chemistry. And it's slightly kind of through a route of the things that I didn't do as well that made me do chemistry. So first and foremost, I did have an inspirational teacher at school, at secondary school, and I've spoken about this a lot in other podcasts and things I've kind of contributed to over the last few years. So Dr. Cousins, she was our chemistry teacher at school, but most importantly to me, she was also a deputy head teacher, and then she became the head teacher whilst I was still there. And it was Dr. Cousins who showed me that you could really be in a leadership role, and because of being a strong woman in that leadership role, and she had a PhD. She had a PhD in chemistry from Imperial College, I think. That's my memory. Yeah. And I can only imagine she got that at a time when it was not. Yeah. Many women wouldn't have gone to university and had PhDs in chemistry. So that gave me a kind of an insight to maybe I could be like Dr. Cousins. I don't think teaching was ever going to be my career choice. But there was something about the leadership role. When I went back for my first day of doing A-levels and just having got my O-level results as they were at the time, I I was going to do geography with biology and maths. Maths was my strongest subject. That was the thing that really, I really enjoyed doing, was very good at. But I hadn't done as well in geography as I had done in chemistry. So that first day in my A-levels, I thought, well, why don't I switch to chemistry? And that way I could continue, being taught by Dr. Cousins. And I look back on that moment and think, thank goodness I didn't do as well at geography and chemistry, because that then meant I went on to do chemistry. When I chose my university course, because I still wanted to do maths, I chose a course maths with chemistry. I went to Exeter to do that. And the reason I chose chemistry to do alongside maths is because maths is a very, what I thought was going to be a subject where you just sat in lecture theatres and it was all very much on your own. I wanted to keep that element of chemistry. It was about working with people, and it was about hands-on. I was because my dad was an engineer, he was also good at DIY, and I've always been quite good at kind of, plumbing and, fixing things. And that's what I liked about chemistry. You could actually use your hands and create things and do things. So that's how I ended up doing chemistry and maths. When I got to university, I did a lot better at chemistry than I did at maths. And therefore I switched to signal as chemistry in my second year. So again, something I didn't go quite so well for me in my first year suddenly turned out to be the thing that, propelled me into the world of chemistry. And I feel really privileged to be part of the community for so long.
Mm-hmm. We speak a lot about the power of role models, and especially getting those role models at an early age. It's quite powerful and I guess amazing to hear that you have an inspiring female chemist PhD, which again seems to be the journey that you took yourself as well. Just from my experience, I had the opposite. I had a teacher who I really didn't get on with, a chemistry teacher I didn't really get on with. Still somehow managed to inspire me to do chemistry, but it was in spite of. Exactly, I could do chemistry, but I'd rather have had a role model like the one that you had. So I guess from your parents' perspective, you would have been like, I can only imagine that my parents would be so happy if I was as interested in school as you were, as much as you did. Did that continue into your experience doing university and your PhD?
Yeah, I think so. I just enjoyed learning and being with people. Interesting, you talk about doing my PhD. So in my early, when I was at secondary school, but not long before I got to choose my A-levels, I wanted to be, first of all, I wanted to be a nurse, and I was going to follow my dad's footsteps, become a Red in the Royal Navy, and I was going to go off and do nursing. Then I decided that I could be a doctor, so I wanted to become a medical doctor. Then I realised you had to do things as a medical doctor. Were really in me. So I thought, okay, and I think that was the connection then with, but I could become a doctor, but not be a medical doctor. So there's a different route. So it's always looking at what's the route to get to and I've always carried these long-term goals. I've always had them I've always had a long-term goal aspiration. I've always kind of worked towards that. So it's about putting the pieces together. So this is starting to kind of, I could see that I could be a doctor, but, an academic doctor, I could do chemistry, and that's what inspired me. But did I loved it. I just liked being with people. But even through my PhD, I realised that the thing that really motivated me was the teamwork. It was being in the lab. It was being with people. And I had to take a real kind of decision at the end of my PhD. Was I going to carry on in academia, or was I going to go into the... Actually, at that point, even though I didn't realise at the time, I'm not sure it was as inviting for me as, in being in the lab at that time. I don't think anybody kind of said, Helen, you've got a real future in academia. But what I did have is a very clear role model in Professor Eddie Abel. He was... I worked in his lab. He adopted me as one of his students, which was fantastic. And Ed was also very heavily involved in the RSC, so I think that's my introduction to the side of chemistry. But again, Ed showed me that you could achieve a career in chemistry, even though he was an amazing academic. He had this other side. It had this part which was about working with the community and building a community. And I realised it wasn't necessarily the hands-on science that I wanted to continue to do and all had curiosity for. It was the people aspect, it was the community aspect. So again, kind of lent itself. And even to the stage where I said to my supervisor when he asked me what I wanted to do when I finished my PhD, I said, I want to go and work for the Royal Society of Chemistry and organise conferences. Wow. So there was something that just kept coming back.
Yeah.
So I obviously was desperate.
Yeah.
And there was a magazine back in the days when student members of the RSC had a magazine called Gas Jar, and in the back of it, it had all the people who contributed to it. And there was this lady who I then became a colleague of, and I thought, that's the job I want. So it was, I looked for these things so I guess all that is kind of relevant.
Yeah.
The things that you can connect with, you can think, oh, I could do that. That could be a route for me.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what I'm hearing as well. I'm also hearing like the mark of the leader, is someone who is people centric, is invested in building networks and trying to create communities. So yeah, that really rings true to me.
I'm curious about people and how they interact, just how that works. So.
Yeah, I think just touching on the PhD, it looks like you went straight into it from your bachelor's degree, and we're often asked by students, to PhD or not to PhD? That is the question. Can you share maybe any advice on your experience and maybe some pros and cons of either side?
Either way, I think when I did my PhD, I think it was probably the normal route to go straight from your degree to your PhD. It was in the days before Masters in Chemistry, so the MChem wasn't in existence, so that's why it was bachelor's. It was in a slightly different kind of job market back in kind of 1990 when I finished my degree, and there were kind of seemed to be three career choices. You either stayed on and did your PhD, or you chose to go into industry and work in chemistry. And I think the same is true when I finished my PhD. Or you went into a kind of finance. There was a lot of my friends and those who were on my course went into finance. And I thought about the options for me, and I did try for a few roles in industry. So I went on what used to be called milk rounds, I don't know if they are now, but the graduate recruitment things. And I went for interviews with ICI, I went for interviews with Mobil Oil, I went for interviews with British Gas or BP and things like that. And each point I went for the interview, it was kind of, thanks very much for the interview, but we would suggest you come back in 3 years. So I think there was a kind of a steer towards doing a PhD. And also, Professor Abel, who I spoke about earlier, he also, strongly encouraged me to stay, and that was quite kind of reassuring. So originally I thought about doing a PhD in Bristol, actually, but as because of my, the results and everything, I opted to stay in Exeter. So what would I advise? One, do a PhD if you really enjoy the learning environment and the lab environment. Do a PhD if you enjoy being with in a kind of a scenario where you're kind of problem solving and want to accept the fact that not everything goes well, and you might have a year with no results, and your whole PhD might be written up in your last 3 months, which I think is a thing. Don't worry about what comes next, just do it because that's what you feel kind of drawn to at the time. Equally, if you choose to go into industry or work in a different role, you can come back to a PhD if that's what really drives you and motivates you a little bit later. So, but be true to yourself and talk to lots of people, but remembering that one person's experience won't necessarily be your experience. So, be very thoughtful about what really motivates and drives you. But equally, doing a PhD, it is challenging. The work is hard, but that teaches you a lot about yourself and about resilience and kind of motivation. And I think if you do opt to do a PhD, there are definitely rewards in terms of your opportunities following.
Yeah. I think it's easier to come out of a PhD and go straight into a senior a role in a company, which is one advantage. But what I got from that was maybe it's not for everyone, it needs to be aligned with what you're looking for.
Yes.
But you can learn a lot. Even just in ignoring the technical aspects for a moment, just building resilience and being able to deal with. I put my heart on this.
So my takeaways from doing my PhD, it taught me how to write. It taught me how to communicate. It gave me a fantastic opportunity to network. And in fact, the skills that I use now that are directly relatable to my PhD are not about the science, although I always like the fact that when I can, with confidence talk about the science, because I can, I think I would have taken away from it those early days. That's where I started to learn about, how do you talk about your work? How do you, engage with people? How do you enthuse people? And PhD obviously is so much more than the actual, the thesis at the end of it, or all the scientific kind of output. I was lucky that some of my research went very well, so I published 6 papers during my PhD, and that was I feel I'm very proud of that. So I had a couple of papers republished as part of an RSC journal, which was an issue, which was all kind of in memory of Ed when he passed away a couple of years ago. So to be able to see my papers republished, I have to say all credit though to the other authors on the paper. I was a PhD student at the time, but I worked with some wonderful people who really motivated and inspired me too.
I did that with that. The student's the one that does the work, and then the supervisor is the one that takes all the credit. But anyway.
Yeah, that's fine. I think we should,
We'll move past that for now. So, Dr. Helen Payne, as you came out and you joined the RSC, as sort of almost like a full circle way as well from your background that you provided. And also, you don't see, like nowadays, people giving 30 years of service at a company. The business acumen that you get from working across the divisions as well is really powerful. I think there's also something quite symbolic about, the chief executive having a technical chemistry background. So that's really cool to see. My question though is, what's kept you here so long? Like, what is it about the culture, or what is it about the RSC that has kept you hungry to keep rising through the ranks?
So there's a few things. The first one, think back to that, what I said at the very beginning about moving schools every couple of years. No, I never made it through 2 full years. I think it was literally every 18 months, and I never made it to the end of term sometimes. So I think there's something in my past that kind of made me want to stick. Maybe. And I think when I came to the RSC, so I saw it as a 3-year thing. When you start work after doing your A levels, your degree, your PhD, you're thinking in these 2 to 3 year time frames. So I thought 3 years. So I was all ready to kind of move organisation after 3 years. That's what I had in mind. That was my planning, because I plan, I'm a great planner, and I've done that throughout my career. The thing about the RSC, one, I was with my community, and I was with people who really I enjoyed working with. It was my subject, so I had a real strong connection. And there's part of me didn't want to let that go. But also, I was very fortunate that each time I thought about moving on, another opportunity presented itself, either because it was something that the new role came up, or I created an opportunity. And I've been fortunate that when I joined the RSC back in 1994, it was just on the kind of cusp of starting to, dare I say, kind of modernise and move into the thing. So it has transformed beyond all recognition for me.
Yeah.
It may not do, maybe for others see something very different, but it has transformed. There's been continual change. So there's always been that next opportunity, whether it's my role has grown, the opportunity to take on a kind of management role, the opportunity to extend my remit beyond membership into kind of projects or so I think that's always been the thing. And then at some point in the last 10, 15 years, I thought, gosh, there is an opportunity to really achieve a very senior role at the RSC. And I think when that started to present itself, and I could get that glimmer of, could that be me in the future, then that's kind of what kept me. And and I think it's also being part of something that's got a lot of kind of legacy and history.
Absolutely.
But there is this thing that if you can look back, 20, 30 years, you can look forward 20, 30 years. So being part of, coming from the past of the RSC, but being able to contribute to and determine the future is also very exciting. So I think that's why I stayed.
It's very cool, I must admit. Just on that level.
Yeah, I think it's evident you had big dreams from an early age, and it sounds like you were able to, as you said, create and craft some opportunities. Sometimes they've got a development opportunity, someone's got a development opportunity for you. Can you just talk about maybe some of the skills that have helped you in creating those opportunities, but also moving upwards in the organisation as opposed to just maybe diagonal or sideways?
So I think one of the things I have done, and I wouldn't say that this is the kind of, I wouldn't advocate this for everybody, because it's be careful what you wish for. I tend not to say no to things. So when people say, would you like to, would you be able to? My answer is usually yes. Hence this podcast. No, it's the opportunity. I think, gosh, what's the opportunity there? When I had been here a couple of years, the chief executive at the time, Tom Inch, he saw me as kind of thought, okay, well, you've got a degree in PhD in chemistry. What else might you be able to offer to the RSC? So he invited me to do the RSC's very first kind of annual review. It was, Beyond a Trustee's Report. It was a glossy 24 pages. And I did that. I enjoyed doing that because it meant that I could learn about the whole organisation, and then I had to, present it. It was produced. I learned a lot about writing, communications, printing, distribution, and it went out to the 40,000 members that we have. And the reward that I got for doing that, I remember Tom said, your reward for doing that is to do it again next year. I thought, oh, okay. So I did it again. And I think it was taking initiative, kind of projects like that. So it just gives you've got your main job, your core role, but then you have the opportunity to do something that takes you a little bit outside your comfort zone. You get to learn something. So those are the both kind of practically enable those kind of opportunities to rise, but also took them when they were offered as well. I may be a little bit more selective these days, but I definitely in those kind of early days through my career. And I think there has been, some really kind of, I remember saying to one of my managers that, I never wanted to do one part of, a role that I then went on to get. And I remember saying to him, why did you give me this job to do? He said, because you said you didn't want it. And that made him realise that it was outside my comfort zone. He said, I'm going to give it, and you will thank me for it in the future. And I do thank him for giving me that opportunity, because it taught me, and that was actually taking on the Chemist Community Fund in its previous kind of incarnation as the Benevolent Fund. And what I learned through that was, we can spend, a very short space of time making a decision, a big business decision, and yet we will spend a lot of time caring attention where it really matters, and that's on the things that we do to support individuals. And that taught me that was a really good lesson for me to understand the importance of the big stuff, but also the importance of the stuff that really matters to individuals.
You need all the cogs to make the machine tick, right?
Yeah.
But someone needs to be the engineer with the full scale vision of it. Yeah, that's interesting. So this is the Steminism podcast. We're all about equity in STEM. One thing that I've noticed with the RSC, we talk a lot about race representation, but there's also a need for better balance in gender equity. But the RSC seems to be making strides in that regard, because there's been quite a lot of women in leadership, yourself included. But on the presidency side, you have Jill Reid handing over to as I think so. So what do you think has been like the catalyst behind these equity movements in the RSC? We've got a way to go, but it's maybe what do you see as the next steps as well?
So first of all, it hasn't always been like that, isn't it? That's why I said the RSC that I joined back in 30 years ago was a very different organisation. But there was a very conscious decision, and I have to give credit here. I will always give credit to colleagues and those who have gone before me, because they really had the vision that we could do better in chemistry. And our work around, whether it's inclusion, diversity, in all its guises, is about finding the evidence and the data, and then making recommendations, and then following through with actions. And that was true with gender. And it was very clear, many years ago when we did some landscape reports in inclusion, diversity, that gender inequality in chemistry came out very clearly. You only have to look at the lack of progression of females in academia and the higher professorial levels to see that there was just not balance there. And actually that goes back to when I made the decision to move from my PhD, and I didn't carry on, I didn't do a postdoc, and I never thought of that at the time, but maybe there was some evidence, even for me personally, though I didn't feel I experienced it, but maybe there was evidence that there wasn't as much encouragement given to women at that time to stay in academia as there was to others in my lab or my group. But we did a piece of work, and it was the groundbreaking kind of breaking the barriers. And one of the things that really transpired is it wasn't just about we present the data, the report talks about the numbers, proportion, the career paths. But there was something really quite powerful in that report, and that was ad hoc feedback or the anecdotal feedback that was given,
Testimonies.
the testimonies that were shared, and that kind of shone a light on something that felt very uncomfortable for chemistry, particularly around the culture and the way that individuals felt, either in the workplace or in the way that they were kind of treated through their career. And it was clear from that we needed to do something, because once you know something, it's very difficult not to know it.
You can't see it.
And one of the things that really kind of, and I remember it came down to a very specific point, and it was on a very specific night, I remember, just before we were about to launch, and our head of comms at the time, Jules, he spoke to me about the need to publish the report and the consequences of publishing. And I think I was with Joe Reynolds, who's kind of with us at the RSC, and we spent a long time that evening also with Ali Palermo talking about the consequences of publishing. It was going to be very uncomfortable for the community, very uncomfortable to share the insights, the feedback. And Jules said to me that, we need to take a decision. We need to either do it or not do it. I think back on that night now and think, gosh, imagine if we'd said, okay, let's not publish because actually it's just too difficult. And that was the night that Jules taught me to be brave and go, you know what, we've got the evidence, we've got the data, therefore we publish. We published, of course it felt uncomfortable, of course there was some follow-up, but that was the turning point, and that was the point at which we started to make a difference. A long way to go, quite rightly so, but also with the support and role modelling of Leslie Oles, who was our first female president, and actually followed by every president since then, male or female. That strong commitment and advocacy for I&D, gender, and then moving on to other aspects of inclusion, diversity that we've led on, really important. So.
Powerful. Very brave, yeah. I think you've got the word right. It is. I can't imagine having been in that position, because especially if you're public facing and like.
Well, we need to be brave, and I'm the one who checks and double checks and worries constantly and makes sure everything's right. But you have to. Yeah. But there are things that you just feel, if I stand behind this, and if I know this is the right thing to do, and if this is a thing that causes me personally the kind of the most grief, it's been worth doing. Yeah. And that's that's one of my own personal kind of values and kind of commitments, is I test it with my own kind of conscience and values.
How not to be a tick box ally.
On the topic of allyship, can you talk about, I think you've spoken about previous presidents supporting you in the past, and I think even working through as part of this podcast and some of the things we'll talk about a bit later. I think you've been an amazing ally in that regard. Can you talk about your experience receiving allyship and then being an ally as well?
God, I think so the whole concept of allyship really has come about for me personally in the recent years, with where it kind of a name or a kind of a label. But I suspect it's been there and evident through all my kind of career and work that I've done. One other thing I've been very conscious of is the need to listen and to understand. So I go back to the point I made about being curious about people, about understanding how people interact and kind of work together. But equally, and this was a colleague who was with us, I think just before the pandemic actually, but she had a really kind of in-depth conversation with one day, and that's where the penny really dropped for me, because I realised that we all have experiences, and some of our experiences shared, but that kind of lived experience of the situation, or even my lived experience of working at the RSC, is different from some colleagues' lived experiences. And it was understanding that really helped me to appreciate that I could be an ally, but also I needed to listen and understand, because I couldn't assume that I have all the answers. I don't. I can't assume that I've got I can just make things happen, because I can't. But it was that piece about understanding, about seeking to see things through different, people's, own experiences or different kind of eyes of others. And that's been really important to me. And I think it's also important about encouraging your colleagues to be allies. So, rewarding where you see that happening. And it really isn't about what people say, it's about what people do. Sometimes it is about what they say or they don't say, but it's about the doing, it's the action that we take, which is so important.
It's like about creating a culture of allyship and not just bandying about the terminology. Obviously, it's important to start with the language, but then how can you turn that into action that actually influences people's lives?
Exactly.
I think that's the aim.
Yeah.
Speaking of culture, I just want to briefly touch on the missing elements report, and I would say this was one of the most enlightening documents I've read about chemistry. Being a black chemist myself, I would say it sort of pulled the cover over and sort of exposed what was underneath. So this is the racial and ethnic inequalities report in the chemical sciences. Can you briefly touch on why this report was put together, like what influenced you putting this report together, and maybe just high level what highlighted?
So I think going back to the experience we've had through breaking the barriers, so thinking about our work that we do is all backed up by policy, evidence, data. And we looked at various kind of aspects of inclusion and diversity, and it became very clear that we needed to focus in on those in our community, black chemists, and also those from minoritized ethnicities. And it was clear that just the representation just isn't there. And that's what we sought to kind of look at, the actual data, the data behind that. So what were the choices, what were the opportunities, what were the barriers, and why were these kind of decision points or these kind of clear kind of milestones for individuals' careers, where they were opting not to stay in chemistry, or they were facing barriers to being in chemistry, or there were just simply no choices there. And through that work, obviously, there was some very stark kind of messages came through, a little bit like breaking the barriers, but I think even more so with missing elements. And when we went to publish that report, we obviously wanted to ensure that not only were we publishing the findings and being very explicit about the findings and calling out what we found, because that was really important, but we had clear actions, recommendations in place. But the real pivotal moment in missing elements was Robert McKay.
Yeah.
It was absolutely clear. So Robert was already working with us on a number of things, and of course, more recently has been elected to be our president-elect, which is like, one of my proudest moments in terms of, and thank you to members who have, voted for Robert into that role. It makes a huge difference. But Robert, when he shared his story and his lived experience, the power behind that was incredible and amazing, but equally it was shocking. And I remember when we were just about to launch the report, I was being interviewed for the BBC. I was being interviewed by Palab Ghosh, and he shared with me some feedback from Robert, and that was all to do with the fact that he hadn't received research funding.
Yeah.
And we didn't know that. Robert hadn't shared with that explicitly, and Palab put that to me on the recording. And it was a genuine sense of this is, actually, it even goes beyond the report findings.
Sure.
This is shocking. This is just absolutely, we just need to make sure that the RSC can play its part and the community can play its part in making a difference. Hence, we put forward our action plan. And the action plan was based on not just a commitment, but I was very clear that if we were going to make a commitment, we better put actions in place. And also, we better support it through funding.
Yeah.
So, obviously, the key outcome of that report was to set up our race and ethnicity unit, which is backed by the £1.5 million of funding from the RSC, and then a number of kind of interventions and initiatives that kind of supported and deliver that work. So 2.5 years after that report, I'm delighted that we have the race and ethnicity unit fully up and running and delivering. And now we have Clive with us, who is our race and ethnicity unit lead. And, Clive has absolutely become the real kind of steer and motivation behind ensuring that we absolutely do deliver on those commitments. And all credit to Clive and his now team who work alongside him in doing some amazing things. And also, I think Clive will agree, working with the community who have become, really invested in the outcomes and the change that we can make happen. But still a long way to go. It cannot stop. These aren't things you do for 2 or 3 years. These are things that we have to commit to as a community for going forward.
That's right. I think the missing elements report, as I said, really opened our eyes. I think we've probably been responsible for 50% of the users. I don't even know how much we watched it. But I think it was highlighting the facts, and that's what drove me not only to start this podcast, which is probably the initial avenue, but then when the revolt became available to actually take on the role, and I really enjoyed working with our scholars to understand how we can better support them, and also working with industry to understand how we can bring the two together. But I think it all starts with those difficult conversations and then putting action behind it. So very happy to be here, and thank you for appointing me on.
Thanks for giving me a job.
We're actually in this very room. I was on the other side of the table being interviewed, so we've
Full circles. And speaking of Robert Mackay, go check Steminism episode 1 for the full story that Helen touched on a moment ago. It is very powerful, and definitely showed us that we were on the right path with trying to spread and communicate this message about race representation in science and STEM in general.
Yeah.
So, not long to go, I've just realised.
Final question, should we go with that?
Yeah, okay, sure. So, it's been amazing so far. Thank you for having us, and I really appreciate your time. I was just interested to know, I guess, a lot of accolades that Clive went through at the beginning gives you a snapshot of your life, but what do you think, from your perspective, is your proudest achievement or your proudest moment?
My proudest moment, okay, I shall go a very personal one from, as we're sitting in Burlington House, go back to, I think about 2008, one of these opportunities I said about outside your comfort zone, take opportunities as they come. And I was given the opportunity to lead a project to refurbish part of our building, and it was the specific focus was on our library. And, the RSC has been in Burlington House for very many years, and, Burlington House itself was built with beautiful libraries for learned societies. But over the years, it turned very much into, it's a research library, it still is, but it turned into a kind of very 1960s-driven building. But being true to why these buildings were originally built, it was about bringing people together to network, to share knowledge, to inspire, particularly in terms of at the forefront of science. So I was given the project to lead the refurbishment of the library, to turn it back into a space that would bring people together and share knowledge and motivate, and all the wonderful things that we now do. So I led that project for just over a year, followed by another year, which we did the ground floor. And we were successful in getting external funding, so I had experience of some fundraising. I had a phenomenal year working with architects and engineers and chartered surveyors. Completely outside my comfort zone, but I loved it. It's very tangible, it's very hands-on. I had a budget which we stuck to. We had a timeline, we had delivery goals. So as a project goes, it was just, your ideal project. And we created a beautiful space in the heart of London. And the reason I say I'm most proud, one, I remember the day that I went in there, it was finished. And I just thought, gosh, I've created something that's going to last, and it's going to be, long beyond me, and it's tangible, and you can touch it, and that was important to me. But there was a moment when we held the first Broadening Horizons event in the library, and we had the cohort with us, the scholars, as they came in the first kind of cohort, and with the industry and with colleagues who brought everybody together, and that. And I felt not only had we created the space, but we were now using the space for its very purpose, which goes back to the history of the RSC and what we're here to do, but reinvented for the modern day, reinvented for a future of where chemistry is inclusive and open to all and accessible, and the culture is one that we want to be part of. So. Yeah, they live nicely, and I think because we're sitting in Burlington House, which has been my home, I feel like I can say that. So.
That's lovely, and I think we'll definitely include some snapshots of the library. It's an amazing venue, as you said, especially in the heart of London as well. So if anyone's looking for a venue for some events, please do get in touch. This has been an amazing episode. I think we've touched on everything from backgrounds to STEM, chemistry, equity. To wrap up, we're just going to have a brief quick fire.
I think we're going to be able to do half of this.
Yeah, we'll do fire. We'll just come to you for one question each. Start with favourite food.
Easy. It is pasta with pesto and cottage cheese. Try it. It's incredible.
I'm sold already.
Okay.
It's lunchtime as well.
Any favorite quotes or expressions?
My favourite quote is "Where there's a will, there's a way."
Yeah.
Don't give in. That's good.
Peter.
Favorite hobbies, activities, or pastimes?
Gosh, I don't really have hobbies, I realise, probably because my hobby is kind of doing what I do every day. I do a lot of work, with other kind of organisations, so I think that became a bit of a hobby. Definitely being with family. But what I really love, actually, if I had my career all over again, I'd be an architect because I just love interior architecture. So that probably tells you why the building was so important to me. But there's something about that which, I could, interiors, I could do all day. I could.
What about least favourite STEM subject?
Oh, I just couldn't. I saw that question. I couldn't even call it because I would only say least favourite because it's the one that although I was good at actually at school, maybe the one I didn't follow. So definitely I certainly enjoyed Baljit, I enjoyed maths, I enjoyed chemistry, maybe the physical side. The physical side of chemistry, I'm not going to say physics because I think STEM, and I think the interdisciplinarity of all of the STEM subjects is so important that I'm not going to single one out. The chemistry's the best one. So.
That's right.
Interesting one. What animal would you say represents you?
Animal represents. I can only share with you my favourite animal because it's kind of wholesome. I don't know why it's my favourite animal, but a giraffe because I just think it defies everything, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's kind of it shouldn't work, but it does, and that's something that just makes me. I remember as a child living near a zoo where the giraffe did the splits, and it shouldn't fly, but it did. It just defies everything. So there you go.
Solid. And first giraffe. Oh, yeah, I guess.
First giraffe. Okay, well, I'm glad to have given you that one.
So we're going to wrap up now. Thank you so much for this. It's been really, really great, and I'm sure our listeners sort of enjoyed it. One thing we like to do is pay people their flowers, and we like to take that quite literally when we pay people their flowers. And we've got you just a small something from our sponsors.
Oh, you're so nice. Thank you. Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much.
Maybe it brings some brightness and joy to your life.
You're very kind, and definitely put it on my definitely not my goodness. So I will keep it on mine as well.
Thank you so much, Helen. It's been a pleasure having you. Thank you to all our audience and watchers. This is the last episode of this season.
Season finale.
Let us know what you've thought, what you've enjoyed. If you want us to have some more guests, and
More seasons.
for watching.
Yeah, it's been amazing. It's been a great experience for us, and we hope you've enjoyed it too. Thank you so much to our guest today, Dr. Helen Payne,
Thank you.
and to all of our guests that have come before.
And to the Royal Society.
So, HERstory is sponsoring us. I am Ali Sada,
I'm so.
and we are Vanta STEM. This has been the Steminism podcast, season 1, and we are out. Peace and blessings.